Great. Well, shall we get started? Okay, I guess I'll go. So I want to welcome everybody. It looks like we have 14 attendees and a lot of people we've talked to or that we know. And the purpose tonight was really to continue our process, our listening exercise. So we've had several city council meetings discussing, what many of you have been, hearing about and reading about, what options there are for the city of Larkspur around, rent stabilization or really addressing displacement and some of the issues that have come up. So we really just hope, we had a speakers list and we're really trying to get, I think a few people may not be in Larkspur and that's fine, but the primary purpose here is to hear from Larkspur owners and to understand their concerns and things we may not have really thought about. And then, to maybe after, the public speaking, public comment to go to a little bit of question answer exchange or something. We're mostly just trying to get, as well informed as we can on all the variety of issues. So Kevin Harif and myself are on the rental ad hoc committee. And I think I see one of our council members, Catherine Way, in the audience. And so with that, maybe I'll hand it over to the city manager and we can kind of see if there are any housekeeping rules and get started. Unless you have something to say, Kevin.
No, you summarized it quite well. And as I think Gabe was expressing, this is an ongoing process. This is an information gathering process for us, for me certainly. We've heard from a lot of interested parties. This is an opportunity to hear from another community and we're looking forward to it and want to be very serious about taking into account the discussion we have tonight.
Great.
So Vice Mayor Paulson and Councilmember Harf, as you know, we took in a speakers list of interested property owners here in Larkspur, landlords who might be affected. And so the city clerk's going to use that list to call on members of our audience to speak with you. She'll bring them in so they can be on camera if they choose. If we exhaust that list and we haven't reached our 8 p.m. Stop time, then you'll have the option to open the floor up after that. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Thank you. Our first name on the list is Bob Gerson Korn. And I'm just asking him to join as an attendee and he'll have to accept on his end. And so I'll give just a moment for that to happen. There we go.
I think Bob's still muted.
Yes, and so I'm just going to ask him to unmute and if he'd like, start his video. Awesome. There we go. Bob, you should be unmuted now. And it does look like we're not able to hear you despite being unmuted. As we work through this speaker, we can also potentially move on to the next. Bill Howard, if you're in the audience, would you raise your hand if you are perhaps joining under a different name? Bill Howard, you can raise your hand. You'd be the next speaker. I'm not seeing one, so I'll go on to the third, Reid Baxter. I do see in the audience here, so I'll bring him over.
Hey guys, this is Reid. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hey, Reid, welcome.
Fantastic, thanks. So I'm Reid Baxter. I'm the Vice President of Operations at Greenbrae Management. I'm responsible for managing the Bon Air apartment complexes. We're kind of in a fact phase, finding phase ourselves. A couple of my thoughts, we're an older 70-year-old garden style apartment complex. All our buildings are built to code. They've been constructed from the 1950s up to the 1990s. Part of our strategy in keeping rent increases to the minimal has been deferring longer term maintenance program, which we've been fairly successful in doing that. I'll say that paradigm is shifting in more recent years with state legislation, notably SB 721, which specifically addresses elevated elements, that's balconies, stairways, walkways, anything that has wood joists in it. Additionally, there's SB 1383, which is a state mandated compost law, where we have to now implement a depot strategy for our complexes. We have regular ADA compliance construction that's ongoing, and we have increases in municipal taxes and sanitary fees. So I'd say from the sounds of what I've just listed off here, there are a handful of things that we are contending with, aside from any potential rent caps that I know you guys are exploring at this stage. And while I certainly can't speak for any of the other landlords, I know that our stakeholders and investors would be concerned if they knew that a rent cap was put into place, to say the least bit. And I'm sure the other stakeholders and investors that are looking at property in Larkspur and Greenbrae would probably feel the same way. Thanks for giving me the floor, and thanks for your service.
Thank you, Reid.
Thanks, Reid.
And during that time, I did see that Mr. Gerson did happen to get the video going, and perhaps we could check in again to see if the audio is working now. I'm going to ask him to start his video. And there may still be some challenges. I'm going to jump to the next speaker, though, Elif from Prime Residential.
Hello.
There she is.
All right. I assume everyone can hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hi, excellent. Hi. Thank you to the ad hoc committee, the city manager, and everyone for holding this forum. We think it's really important to have the opportunity to discuss rent control as it affects housing providers and owners in Larkspur and Greenbrae. Will is going to be on, and he will be elaborating further on some of the points we've made in the past, and I don't want to retread too much, but I do think with this forum of housing providers in mind, I just wanted to make some high-level points as it affects our particular industry. And I would just say that in terms of the consideration of rent control, it's a time where we're having the highest inflation in the last 40 years. And I know people have made this point, but I just want to say that housing providers are acutely affected by that inflation as well. And the necessity to allow housing providers to cover our costs, let alone make a return on our investment right now, is a pretty high bar. And as we discussed at the public workshop 2 weeks ago, obtaining a fair return on our investment is something that is essential in this process. I'd add 2 more points. One is that we are on the heels of eviction moratoria expiring, and over the last 3 years, housing providers have been forced to bear a pretty significant burden in ensuring that people who were negatively affected by the pandemic remained housed, right? And that was a service that we provided for free. And while some rental assistance was provided in that effort, a lot of those costs were never recovered, and frankly, probably never will be. And so, you know, it bears repeating that that's a burden that no other industry has borne. Grocery providers haven't, gasoline, utilities, no one has, you know, had to endure that burden like housing providers are. So proposing rent control at a time where we're on the heels of emerging from from very burdensome eviction moratoria is very much like pouring salt into a wound. And we're hoping that the council, you know, does focus on long-term solutions as well in terms of increasing our housing supply. And in terms of a shorter-term solution, we will say that we do believe rental assistance is a better option, and we believe that any funds or resources that the city would utilize to implement a rent control program would be better utilized in funding a rental assistance program. So that's all I had to say. I really appreciate the time. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Elise.
Yes, thank you, Liz.
And our next comment will come from Will Madison. And I'll ask him to join as a panelist.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, he will.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the time and the opportunity. So, you know, as we've talked about, first, I wanted to give an update on our program of rental assistance. We continue to get applications. So we're up to 20 residents now, which is 5% of our property. And that's a very significant number. You know, at the 5%, 10% range is when you start to, you know, consider a lot of housing meeting affordable measures, and you start to get into, you know, property tax abatements at that level. So we're proud of that 5% and think it's making a significant difference for those who are at risk of displacement. Again, this is a means tested approach, and the average discount is $370 a month. And so for rents starting in the 2,000 range to, you know, 23, 24, 2,500 range for a 2-bedroom, you know, that's a really meaningful discount. And we think it's targeting those who are most at risk of displacement, which I really think is what this conversation is about. I think rightfully so. That's where the council has taken this to make sure that, you know, people are not pushed out of the community. I wanted to talk a little bit about 1482. There were some really great questions on that, I think, in the last council meeting, and some questions as to, you know, why does 1482 allow rental increases above inflation? And also, if you're implementing something locally, what are the requirements for pass-throughs or other avenues for exceptions? You know, 1482 was designed to be implemented across all municipalities in California, regardless of size. And for that reason, there is no administrative burden, right? There's no pass-throughs, there's no committees, and that makes it quite simple for any municipality to have rent control in a legal way. But it does allow for increases above inflation for that reason. So the pass-throughs, the exceptions for you know, above average costs are built into the mechanism. But as we noted, you know, in the prior meeting, if Larkspur wanted to do this individually, it would be required to have those avenues for both residents and for landlords to have exceptions to the rule. But it increases the administrative burden, the cost, and really the complexity for all involved to stray from that 1482 approach, which is a very simple, straightforward implementation. So that came up a number of times. I wanted to touch on that. I also wanted to just touch specifically on our situation. There's been a lot of, I guess, insinuation that if, you know, whatever the rental increase is each year that's allowed, that's our quote unquote return on investment. That if, you know, rents increase 3%, we'd be getting a 3% return on investment, and it's up to everyone to decide what a fair return is. But I wanted to clarify that, you know, our property is cash flow negative, and will be for years. So, the rental increases that we are getting are not going to investors. They're not going to the bottom line. They're going to cover the basic costs of owning real estate. We purchased our property knowing that, in our perspective, it's the most beautiful place to live in the Bay if you're renting. There's no better views. There's no better setting to live. This is a fantastic place to be. And so long term, we expect those rents to appreciate to market. But for years, this will be a negative cash flow proposition. And so I think that's important context for the ad hoc committee, the council, and also for residents. There's an idea, I think, that possibly we can use cash flow from other properties to pay for Skylark. We're referenced often as a large landlord. We have individual investment entities, and SEC regulations require actually that we do not share funds between those entities. They're different investors. So there's not the ability to take funds from one area and share it to another. I also wanted to touch on just inflation within Larkspur, because the council, I think, is probably most familiar with those costs. So over 5 years, sewer costs are going to increase 7.8%. That's just the city of Larkspur water and sewer. And, that's an incredible increase of 45% over that time period. So, those are costs a lot of times that are built into leases for us, and I'm sure for other landlords, utilities are included. And I think that's an important consideration as you go through. A city like Los Angeles has different treatments for rents that are for leases that are inclusive of utilities versus not. And I think that's important for a lot of reasons, but among others, utilities increase faster than average CPI. And I just wanted to touch on the tax appeal nature, because I think it's applicable to the group of folks on this call tonight, but also to single family owners, which is that's a real consideration that I hope the city is thinking about. And I think I was glad to hear it come up for the first time last meeting, but if there seem to be questions about the assessment of market property, so I'd be happy to speak to that in a two-way manner if helpful later on in the call.
That's fine.
So again, appreciate the forum. I'm happy to engage in a dialogue or a discussion. And thanks everyone for the time.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Will. And I particularly appreciate, some of the financial details. As a kind of quick comment from our side, I mean, I think at the last city council meeting, to me, the question that I tried to frame things in is what is fair. And part of tonight is to see what is fair, what is fair to Prime, what is fair to Bonaire, what is fair to the tenants. And it's a difficult one. And there's a lot of externalities and a lot of, pieces in the way. But I think as we kind of slog through some of the state legislation and some of the, financials and inflation and macroeconomics, we get a little better of a handle, as to what's fair, because we really, we really can't speak to one group alone. We really need to build a consensus here, and it's quite challenging at the moment. But yeah, for all that, thanks so much, Will.
Yep.
So,
thank you.
So Gabe, it's Kevin. Can I just toss in something?
Absolutely.
Real quick?
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your discussion, Will, because it really clarifies a lot of the challenges that you face in this market. But given those challenges, I guess, can I ask, why did your company invest in this property? I mean, it sounds like at the outset, it probably, given all of those things, which I'm sure that you guys had figured out ahead of time, why did it make economic sense for you to invest in this property, or your investors to invest in this property?
Yeah, I mean, it will clearly make sense long term, but I've said this and I'll say it again. We studied your history of looking at rent control and deferring to 1482 twice, and with 80% consistency on the council, we believed we were investing into a very stable regulatory environment. And if you can increase rents with, along the lines of 1482, this over a very long period of time, and to be clear, we're long-term holders. We would not have purchased this if we were looking to buy it and sell it in 3 years, right? But over a long term, we will be able to, get to a value that we think makes sense. But if you take the 1482 paradigm and compare it with a 60% of CPA or CPI paradigm, it's drastically different in terms of the time period that it takes to get to positive cash flow.
So that's helpful. But I guess I'm still puzzled about whether and to what extent you took those things into account when you made your acquisition decision at the outset, because those are all things that you could have, in a risk analysis, you would have taken into account. But you still decided to buy the property. So that's what I'm puzzled by. Are
you saying we should have anticipated?
I'm not telling you what you should have done or shouldn't have done. I'm just trying to understand your risk assessment process when you made the acquisition.
Yeah, I think I probably said I made it as clear as I can, which is that we looked at your history on the council and made a judgment based on that.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, and I will give Mr. Gerson another opportunity here to see if he's able to unmute. I'm going to ask you to unmute Mr. Gerson, if you're able to provide comments now.
Yes, Allison, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Oh, magical. Now, first person I have to thank is Allison, because I've probably talked to her 4 or 5 times in this last week, just trying to get to where we've finally made it. Because I'm a little challenged. I'm not quite as sophisticated on the computer as others. So thank you, and thank you to the council for the opportunity. I feel from the couple speakers that I have heard, I looking at this a little from a different perspective, in that my wife and I own a relatively small 6-unit building in Larkspur, apartment building. And so I guess from a smaller building perspective, we currently do not have any tenants. We do not believe that feel they're being forced out of town or facing unreasonable rents and so forth. So I guess I'm looking at it just more as a general businessman as well as a landlord. And I look at it this way. I think every tenant, as well as every homeowner, would like to have lower costs. Everybody would like to pay less rent. Everybody would like to have a smaller mortgage. And of course, the rents and the cost of rents and the cost of homes are driven by the question of how many people are fighting over or arguing over or competing for a limited number of apartments and homes. And one question that I haven't heard addressed is that what the population of renters is in the city of Larkspur as compared to the number of people in Larkspur who feel like they're being chased out of town by unreasonable rent increases. So that's a number that I would like to have a handle on. And And for those people who feel like they're in a hardship, financial hardship, because their rents are going up faster than they can afford, it seems the proper way to help those people is to help those people, not to throw a big tent over all landlords when we don't even know what percentage of the tenants are in that position or in a difficult position. So to blame and penalize property owners for the cost of housing is not reasonable and doesn't really address the real issue of the availability of housing versus the number of people competing for it. So I guess the last kind of point I'd like to make is that property owners, my wife and I have had this small 6-unit building for a little over 20 years. And basically it's our 401k. And at least in our case, the costs of ownership are not stagnant. Every year, there will be, I could almost promise you, there will be increases in PG&E, water district, MMWD, the sanitary district. We all have to now replace our sewer laterals in addition to raising rates for the sanitary district. All of these, well, at least the sewer laterals are probably a minimum of $10,000 each to up to 30 or 40, depending on the sewer lateral. The assessor will always want a few more dollars. Electricians and plumbers, from my shopping around, are starting at about $150 an hour. And then when you add in general carpentry and painting for general building maintenance and apartment maintenance, especially for some of these, most of these buildings, our building included, is 50 years old. And if you want to add in double glazing windows and a new roof and the permit fees to accomplish all of these things, the fees are, I mean, the costs are not stagnant. It's, and unless we could get everybody else on the same page, that all of these people that affect increasing costs are limited to whatever percentage the council might agree is, or it comes up with in their final decision. So I guess those are my general comments, probably a little disjointed, and I apologize for that. But
no, that's very helpful.
Certainly happy to respond instead of stutter my way through my few notes.
So Gabe, unless you want to chime in, I'd be happy to ask Bob a question or two.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Bob. I mean, I'm tracking every speaker, and just to reiterate, I think one of your questions was, can we determine the number of displaced, and to see if it's a big pain point or maybe just a small vocal minority. My initial thought is it's just so hard to get data. I mean, I've been really spending a lot of time on this issue and on this ad hoc committee, and a lot of people are self-evicting. A lot of things aren't known. I think in your case, the other thing is Larkspur is different from other municipalities because we have a lot of people like you, small landlords. We heard from Will, we heard from, Reid, and those are larger, properties, but, we're very aware that they're 4plexes and 6plexes, and these are your 401ks. So we're trying to get it, but the data has been quite hard to get at. And then, you raised a really broad philosophical point, which I'll still lump into what's fair. Who pays for affordability? Who pays for this? And, I know that Marin, I've been really reaching out to the county of Marin, and they just had a fairly large program that was in the IJ to provide rental assistance, and there are other programs. So there are other avenues, but this is one of the avenues we've really felt we have to explore as well. So those are the two main points I got out of what you said, and I'm still trying to learn. But anyway, with that, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh no, that's fine. That kind of covered some of the things that I wanted to say. And at the outset, I just want to thank Bob for his comments, because I hope it's been clear from my personal engagement in this conversation publicly that I understand there's a distinction between large corporate interests and folks like you, Bob, who are doing this because this is what you do for people and for yourself. And we need to take that into account in whatever decision making that we go through in this process. And that's why we're having this discussion tonight. So your input, as far as I'm concerned, is invaluable. Given that, I guess I'd like to ask the question, what do you think we should do? I mean, given the fact that we have two separate categories of landlords in this community, we have large corporate landlords, and I don't want to say that because some of them are family-owned enterprises. I understand that, but they're larger, and they're not you. And I absolutely agree that, the one size does not fit all. And I think I've made that clear in my public comments on this issue. But I guess I'd ask for your help in advising us about what you think would be the best solution given those distinctions.
Well, gee whiz, I appreciate that question. And boy, I certainly wish I had a magic one or two sentence answer to that, because I do realize that you folks who work, you gentlemen and I don't know if there's a lady on the commission right now, but you folks put in lots of time and effort and work very hard. But like with everybody, there are limitations to what one can do, and to be generic is the right word about it. The best way to help a person who needs help is to help that person. Not that that's easy to do, but that is better than penalizing some other person so that that first person can be assisted or helped. And that's kind of how it feels. And I don't mean that in a personal way, because we have 6 tenants and none of them are complaining about their rents. And we try to be very reasonable. I mean, we in all of our years, in over 20 years, we've never increased rent more often than every 18 months, usually every 2 years. But it's to compensate so that we can stay even, so to speak, and allow inflation in the value of the building to be our primary funding to our 401k. So, but we just did put in a new sewer lateral. And of course, in doing that, we had to repave the driveway. So there's 30 grand in 3 days that was spent in 3 days. And we were not going to do that again, hopefully, because the sanitary district says they'll warranty our sewer lateral for 20 years. But it's a small building. It's actually 2 structures. It's 2 units in a duplex and 4 in a townhome, but it's one property. put new roofs on those, which probably we're not going to have to do for about 5 years, but that's going to be $30,000 or $40,000 again in 3 days. So it takes a lot of $100 rent increases to fund that. And so I'm sorry, let me get back to your original question. I don't want to skirt it. But as difficult as it is to find a way to help a person who needs help, rather than look for somebody else to be penalized. And I grew up. I'm well up into my 70s, so when I say I grew up in San Francisco, that was a long time ago, and that's basically what San Francisco did when they passed their rent control 40 years ago, or now whatever it is. I happen to know people living in rent-controlled apartments who own their own rental properties in other cities. So that's what happens in some cases when a big tent is put over landlords, instead of addressing the individual persons who need the assistance some way. And so that's in some ways counterproductive, that seems to me. You're funding the wrong people. You're funding some people who help it, but you're funding people who don't need it at the same time. So I don't know if that helps at all, but
no, it absolutely does help, and I appreciate it. And the thing that I'm struggling with, because I'm very sensitive to, personally, I'm sensitive to the needs and challenges that you have given the circumstances of the property that you own. And as I said, I think I've made it clear in my public statements on this. I want to make sure that whatever we do takes that fully into account, because you provide an essential service, actually, to our community by providing housing for people on a limited basis. And I really don't want to do just to do a blanket thing that affects folks who are differently situated in the same way. I really don't want to do that. But there are ways to accommodate that. And one way, for example, would be to adopt a rent control ordinance, but only have it apply to properties of a certain size and exclude properties of a lesser size, like yours. Is that something you would be okay with?
Well, to sound self-serving, I guess that would be good for me, but I, at the same time, even though I don't have a large property, it seems a little, I'm not sure that it addresses my concern of helping the people who need the help, rather than looking for somebody else to be negatively affected to help the first person. The first person being the tenant who can no longer afford the most recent rent increase. I realize that's a whole bag of worms, and if that were easy to do, they probably would have done that in San Francisco 40 or 50 years ago.
There are federal housing programs that will provide rental assistance. I mean, and I don't think that's the direction that we want to really be going in this conversation.
Oh, okay.
I mean, unless you think so, and that's why I'm asking the question. I mean, because some people have suggested that that's the answer to the problem. I don't really agree with that. So the question is, how do we make the distinctions between folks like you who have modest properties that are investments for their own personal needs, as opposed to larger enterprises that are mostly doing their investments for investment purposes.
Yeah,
And that's one of the biggest issues that I'm struggling with in this conversation, because I think you need to be given assurance that you're fine and that your tenants are fine and that you're fine as a property owner. Because I don't see you as the kind of person who is doing this for anything other than those reasons. But we got to do something, because we also have people who are living in rental situations that they just can't afford, and they're going to have to leave our community. So that I'm honestly asking for your advice about how we make those distinctions in a way that is meaningful and productive to folks in your position, but also respects the interests of those renters who feel like they're being pushed out.
Boy.
I mean, that's the reason we're having this conversation tonight, quite honestly.
I really appreciate the time that you've given me here, and I wish I had a brilliant response. And I will tell you this: if I can come up with even a half a brilliant thought, I will find a way to send it to you as a follow-up, because I honestly, I understand part of your question is you're trying to separate us. I don't know what the magic number of units is, but maybe, I guess even 6 units could be considered corporate if there were 12 buildings of 6 units each owned by one company. Then that would be more of a corporate holding instead of individual owners like my wife and I, who have one 6-unit building.
Right.
And so I guess as I read your question, you're trying to separate kind of a corporate entity from individual property owners.
Yes, and frankly, people who have a personal investment in our community, like you.
Yeah.
And that is something I think is invaluable and needs to be respected in this conversation. And that is, I want to make sure everyone understands, that is an important goal of mine in this conversation. But the struggle that we're having is that we've got to make some distinctions. We have to figure out where the line gets drawn. And the line has to get drawn in a way that respects both your interests, which I think are invaluable, and the interests of folks who are living in rental communities where they are feeling like they're getting pushed out and we'll lose them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the community we want to have. So that's really the conversation I'm hoping to have tonight, to try to figure out where we draw those lines.
Yeah. Well, yes, I understand your concern, your question, and boy, anything I can come up with or contribute in the future towards that end, I'm certainly willing to take whatever time and approach that in a positive way, because all of this, I feel strongly that it's important for whatever the council does, that it not either create or exacerbate a negative connotation in the landlord-tenant terminology. Mm-hmm. That it's possible. I mean, I feel like my wife and I are very fortunate that we have 6 very good tenants. We get along. My wife and I are either at that property and just coincidentally bumping into one of our tenants on a weekly basis. And so we feel, I guess we feel blessed that we have a good, fortunate relationship with our tenants. They all feel, obviously, they're paying fair rent for what they're getting. And I realize every property, every building, every apartment, the inside of every apartment is different. The amenities that any property has to offer is different, but the goal at the end is to have some harmony. Mm-hmm. And that's how my wife and I feel about it. I mean, we enjoy going over to our property and cleaning up and fixing things and seeing a tenant and having them smile. How you doing? How's everything going? And great. And that's the harmony we need to get through the next 10 years before we're gonna probably have to unload the property just because of age, you know. So
well, I really have to apologize for taking up so much of your time, but everything you've said tonight makes enormous sense to me and is really consistent with, I think, what we're trying to accomplish here. So thank you.
I thank you. I thank both of you very much, and appreciate your patience.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Our next commenter will be Jerome Bernal. And Mr. Gerson, I'm going to move you back to the attendee side where you can watch the rest of the meeting.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, hi guys. Thank you very much for hearing me out. First, I own the Blue Rock and Larkwood apartments in town. I am an individual. I'm not a corporation. It's an individual thing. One thing I wanted to know, you're addressing rent stabilization, AB 1482. I have no problem with it the way it stands now. I think it's fair as far as the increase. I think what they allow is excessive, and I'm certainly doing, or what's necessary. It's 5% over cost of living. I'm sorry, but I did join the forum a little late, so I missed some of the earlier speakers. But I think they've kind of mentioned the fact that for landlords, expenses go up considerably. Rents aren't going up 10%, which is allowed. What's allowed in Larkspur currently, I believe it's 5% over cost of living. Before August 1st, it was 8.8. Mine are basically cost of living increases, if that. But what I'd like to address here is the fact that I've owned the Blue Rock for over 30 years. And before that, I still do own property in San Francisco as well. And I want to address the whole idea of rent stabilization or rent control or whatever you want to call it, like Shakespeare said, a name, rose by any other name. However, when I purchased Larkspur, rents on a 2-bedroom apartment in Larkspur and in San Francisco, where I have my property, were basically on parity. They're basically the same. And over the last 30 years plus, a lot of factors have come into effect, but most of all, I think it was rent control. San Francisco, I think as Bob mentioned before, only allows 60% of cost of living expenses along the way. But what happens, and I think most economists are going to tell you that price controls really don't have the more or less the reverse effect. It may work temporarily, but long-term, it's the complete opposite of it. And this is what happened in San Francisco and Larkspur. When these rents were pretty much the same, what happened is San Francisco rents have probably more than doubled during that time period. And here's a reason why that you're not going to hear about. Basically, the way it stands now, if a tenant vacates, a landlord can set the rent at whatever figure he wants. And landlords in San Francisco, because of rent control, they realize if they're going to have a vacancy, they're going to want to get the top dollar that they can from this unit, because they can have a tenant that's going to be in there for 20, 30 years under a 60% rent increase or under rent control. So if they do get those costs of sewer laterals, if they get the costs of Ross Valley Sanitary District, taxes, insurance, interest rates that are going up for a variable amount, they're able to pass these things on, and they're not able to pass those on in San Francisco. There is, but it's a really tight requirements on that. So consequently, when a vacant unit becomes vacant, they charge the top rent. Also, if they can't get that rent, they're not going to lower the rent as in Larkspur or Marin. Landlords there, if they're not getting the rent after a month, they'll drop the rent so that they can fill it, knowing that if their costs go up in the future, they'll be able to perhaps pass some of these expenses along. In San Francisco, though, they did not. So they raised the rents to a higher level, and if they couldn't get it filled, they left it vacant. They didn't lower the rents, which basically resulted in a supply and demand curve where the supply of vacant units was less, which, as you probably know from Economics 101, created more of a demand or increased the price on this. So over the years, because of this, vacancies have occurred and landlords have raised their rates to make up for this loss from supporting other people on this. The other factor is when you're talking about community, and in San Francisco, if several applicants come in and somebody is looking for an apartment, a landlord, I'm not speaking for myself, I'm talking to other ones that I've spoken to as well. If they have a tenant that's been in their last place for 12 years, they really don't want that, or 20 years, because they could, at the end of another 10 or 20 years, they may be way under market rents on this. So they're looking for the divorcee, they're looking for the college student right out of college, somebody that's transient, who's just in the area. In Marin, in Larkspur, if I see somebody that's been in their last unit 12 years, that's the kind of person I want, because they're going to add to the community. So you're really, I shouldn't say discriminating against somebody, but you're selecting somebody that's more favorable to you economically. It's a business decision for almost everybody on this. So I really don't think that rent control or rent stabilization is a good thing. It really works in the opposite effect that you really want to do. It creates more of a transient populace for the area, and it drives rents up. That's the long and the short of it. Questions?
No, that was pretty helpful, especially since I've been looking at probably 5 or 10 municipalities, and I haven't really looked at San Francisco. Everyone brings Berkeley up as kind of an extreme with Santa Monica, and then Fremont has rent control, and Bell Gardens, and there's some others up here. But yeah, I think the thing I struggle with. So Kevin spent a good bit of time talking to Bob earlier, and I might just chime in where I differ. I'm not really and we don't necessarily have the same position. We're on an ad hoc committee, and one of our council members is in the audience, and she probably has her own opinions. So we're really trying to learn from all of you. And for me, the first preference would be means testing. And Kevin and I were on an ad hoc committee earlier for mobile homes, and I really was pushing for a means tested solution. I think Will from Prime picked up on that, and they're trying to do that at Prime, which I think is admirable. I'm struggling with a few things. We're living in a very unusual time where, again, since Ronald Reagan and Paul Volcker, we haven't seen inflation at this level. I think it's averaged around 2% or something for almost 40 years. So it's hitting everyone, including those of you here, and obviously really hitting hard a lot of the tenants. And over half of Larkspur, the people we represent, are renters. And if we trust the census and the ACS, they're quite rent burdened. It's getting worse. So we're struggling with what to do. And for me, there is no one answer. I don't think setting a threshold for number of units or any even rent stabilization. I mean, we're really also looking to build more units. We're reaching out to the county. At least I am. I don't see a single solution, but in reflection to what you said, I think you're kind of recapitulating a lot of the points that have been brought up by Hayek and people over the years, that that, if you start, playing with price controls, you end up with a long-term liability. And I'm well aware of that argument. But we also live in a time, I own my home and it's worth about, 3 times what I paid for it. And everyone in this room has that same benefit. So, where do we draw the line for a distributive? I think our balance sheets look a lot better than our profit and loss sheets sometimes. So, what does that say to this equation? That's something I'm aware of as well. But again, it's a hard one. It's a very emotional issue. It's also a rather widespread issue. I think the displacement has really grown to high proportions. And, as you, Jerome, and all the others, I mean, we need people to feel that they can make money here. There has to be a fair return on profit, for this. And, we're looking at developers and for future units, even if they're exempted by Costa-Hawkins. So anyway, I just wanted to just give some reflections. It's a listening exercise, but so you have some transparency into what's going on in my head, at least. So I definitely appreciate all your comments.
I'm not worried about making the money. I think that AB 1482 as it exists now is more than fair. But I'm just saying in the future, this is going to be a problem. Long term, it is not the answer for this. And it has the opposite effect, as most economists will tell you that. That's the thing. I mean, you're suppressing it, but Adam Smith had the idea, the invisible hand. It's, these, like Bob said before, these people that need, I really don't know of anybody that's really having a financial problem with rents, at least in my buildings. Maybe they're too low or something. They're lowest in Marin. But I think they need help, but I think it needs to be from some other organization rather than putting it on the landlords. So, but I think what's going to happen is it's going to get worse. The problem is going to get worse with rent control. And for those people that do need help, I think there needs to be some federal aid coming in or something like that. But I don't think you can put it on the landlords. Because in San Francisco, I know of a lot of people that their tenants are affording a piano or whatever else, and the landlords can't even afford a piano teacher for their kids because the tenants have been in there for 20 years and they're paying a very minimal rent. You'd have to have that balance between them. So it's again, I don't think this is really going to help the tenants with the problem long run. So, and I don't know what the answer is. I honestly don't. So,
so if I could just make a comment real quick here.
Sure.
In a humorous vein, I appreciate the vague reference to Hayek and the less vague reference to Adam Smith. It is like going back to economics 101. So, but we have to take all of those things into account. And please be assured that we all are very smart people, and we understand the principles that we're discussing tonight.
And Jerome, just one other thing. I think, one thing I do appreciate about 1482 is that it has a sunset. It will expire in 2029. So the notion that this is a forever, decision is something that I'm not comfortable with, especially given that 2020 to 22 have been, as I said, if you look at the CPIs, they're spiking. We haven't gone through this. And we don't know what, next year will bring with all the Fed the rate hikes and so forth. But anyway, I do value everything you said, and kind of, again, the comparison to San Francisco is very helpful because I'm trying to look at least 5 or 10 municipalities to get a sense for what's been working. There's an awful lot of research out there, and it's helpful to sometimes get some of the data.
Right. Well, just as a reminder, when Feinstein passed rent control in San Francisco, she said it was only temporary for a few years as well, and that was 40 years ago. So that slippery slope sometimes gets pretty
now slippery. You're really dating yourself.
I've been at this a long time, so it started in my 20s. So anyway, thank you very much for your patience and listening to everyone.
And thank you for your contribution. It's really enormously valuable.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Drew.
Bye.
I'm looking for our next speaker, Keith Fontana. Keith Fontana, if you're in the audience, would you raise your hand, and perhaps you're under a different Zoom name? We're looking for Keith Fontana. We also have a speaker who we had earlier on the list, not joined yet, but Bill Howard. I do see on the list. I'll bring him over first. And Keith Fontana, if you're in the Zoom meeting, please raise your hand to provide comments.
I'm just seeing Bill.
Yes, I think we'll start with Bill Howard.
Hello. Our topic today is rent control, and there's many arguments about the pros and cons of rent control. The first thing I would like to do is to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight. I would like to start by pointing out that the Supreme Court of the United States in 1921 upheld a temporary rent control law in the District of Columbia. It set a precedent in American law that government can regulate housing conditions during times of emergency to maintain or improve living conditions. The decision was made because there was an error to the Court of Appeals of the district. And the majority at that time were Holmes, Brandeis, and Clark. It has now been 101 years since the Hirsch case. A lot has changed, but the fact that government can regulate housing conditions during times of emergency to maintain or improve living conditions has not abated. Home is a part of all of us, part of our dream to live safely in a place we call home, whether owned or rented. Because home is so significant, the fact that home is increasingly out of reach for so many is a tragedy, especially for younger generations seeking their own dream. I want to digress for just a minute to tell you a little bit about myself. I did not come from a wealthy family, but luckily I found my way to California as a Navy veteran and was fortunate to join IBM in the early 60s. I worked my way up through the ranks to become the Chief Information Officer of 3 Fortune 500 companies. I also served on a city council of Larkspur from 1976 to 1980 and was elected mayor in 1978. I have a broad understanding of the challenges facing Larkspur government, including what to do and how to do it for housing for all. Leaving behind my digression about who I am, I now want to return to the issue of homes. I am not aware of any diversion from the 1921 Supreme Court Hirsch case. But a lot has changed, and government has tried myriad ideas, but has made the problem harder to solve because of its efforts. Houses are more expensive. Adjusted for inflation, houses are 2.3 times more expensive at the low end and 2 to 3 times that at the high end. According to Harvard University, homeowners earn 50% more than in 1960. But average home prices have gone up 112%. Nearly half of renters struggle to afford their homes and spend more than 30% of their income on housing. The basic problem is that not enough homes are being built, which causes prices to rise. Home construction per household at its lowest level today in nearly 6 decades. So it has been over 60 years since home construction has fallen to where it is today. And that is really the basic problem that we're facing. Any economist that has studied the housing market will tell you the solution to this problem is to build new housing. I'd just like to point out that the Empire State Building is synonymous with the can-do attitude of the people that we are, builders, creators, and innovators. From start to finish, the completion of the Empire State Building took 1 year. Compare that to building anything today. There are many projects in Larkspur that have taken much as 6 to 12 years to just obtain a permit. Again, I'd like to emphasize the way to make housing more affordable is to build more housing. The secret to affordability is less restrictive land use regulation. The less restrictive land use regulation cities have about a cost of housing multiple of about 3 times the median house price. That is to say, it's 3 times the gross annual income before taxes. But the more restrictive land use regulation cities have a multiple from about 9 times gross income to 20 times. So it is my private opinion that there are many cities around the country and the world that are actively practicing less regulation affordability. And Larkspur, in my opinion, should just do it. Set aside the more restrictive arguments and enable best practices. Remove the barriers and avoid cluttering up the solution. I just want to reemphasize that I share the concerns that you have. It is almost criminal that people today who live in Larkspur must look elsewhere many times to find a place that they can afford. And I would really encourage you to look at those cities that have the lowest restrictions and adopt a lot of the practices that they have adopted. And I urge you to ignore the idea of just adding more regulation. It is very easy to find places throughout this country and around the world where people can find creative ways to build more housing. And that is the simple answer to a very complex question. Thank you again for allowing me to speak tonight, and I'll yield to the next speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm looking in our audience for Keith Fontana or Thomas Creedon. If either are in the audience, Keith Fontana or Thomas Creedon, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing them in the audience. Since the meeting has started, we did get one more speaker card request and one raised hand for public comment. If the ad hoc committee would like to open it up to those two additional speakers.
Yes, please.
Okay, the first that came in was Dennis Gillardi. And I'll ask you to join as a panelist.
The mouse worked.
Hey, Dennis.
Good evening, gentlemen. Okay. All this stuff keeps popping up my end. I'm trying to clear it out. Well, thank you for having this, and thank you for Allison for recognizing I was out there and letting me in here. I have a problem with the statements, or one statement made by Kevin, that there's got to be a distinction between, the large corporate and the individual. I don't know how you're going to define it. I've been an investor and have had housing in Larkspur for over 40 years. And the idea of trying to think that, and with that, from an investor standpoint, I have gone in, raised money, borrowed money, maintained the apartments, and raised rents accordingly. I have no tenant that is unhappy. There are tenants that have struggled, and I've addressed that as we've gone along. But the part of this equation, when you start looking at the large corporate versus the smaller, is where do you put Jerome? Where do you put Bonaire? Bonaire's only been around for 4 generations. I've only been here for 40 years in the housing. And if you start to put limits in, I'm not sure how you're going to draw a distinction between landlords who have been providing the essential service of housing at reasonable rates, and the landlord / any investors they have been satisfied for many years. We have not had or heard of many tenants in Larkspur that have been forced out because of rent increases. There have been some pocket problems, yes, but to concentrate and say, look at the large organizations and they're creating the problems, I think you're missing part of the equation. Kevin asked at the beginning, what prompted Prime to buy this? What analysis did they do? If they're in for a long term, based on my experience, I would have to hold the property for at least 15 years plus before I was paying off debt. I don't think that's the formula that is happening today with organizations that are buying real estate. This is major investment time. There's a lot of money out there that is trying to be utilized someplace. And I think just in general, what's happened at the level of Skylark is the sellers of the properties got a good deal. The buyers didn't do their homework. Because I go right back to how can you take large corporate and look at Bonaire, look at me, look at others. It's Corte Madera, but I've got a couple dozen units down there in one project. I've got a woman who just celebrated her 80th birthday. She's been a tenant since she was 30 years of age. She retired as a school teacher from Marin City. And I checked to make sure that her rent is affordable, and most importantly, that she is food safe. She has a good network. She's happy. She won't even let me remodel the apartment because she likes the way it is. It hasn't been touched in 50 years. So be careful as you're looking at trying to come up with a way to put rent control in and designate large and small, because I just can't fathom how one can make that distinction. And as someone else said, what happens, if you have 4 buildings that aggregate 40 units? It's a slippery path that I think that, we have to be very careful about. And to conclude, I really have, since I'm very active in community and I know who's doing what, there's been very few, if any, tenants, residents of Larkspur who have been renters who have left our community because of rent increases. It's normal turnover, and I've got a few decades of watching that. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up those points, Dennis. And yeah, I think I'm just taking it in. The general question, I think there's difficulty when you say not many have left. I don't know that that's true. I mean, the problem is a lot of this is based on anecdotes, and I've heard many anecdotes. I took, in this meeting, I've written very meticulously all 7 or 8 comments down. And one of our city council meetings, I wrote down all 35 comments, and there were a variety of reports of people who left or new people who were leaving. I can't verify all that, but one thing I do want to say is we definitely have an acute issue. So I don't want to gloss over that. I think that I agree with you. I don't believe that the threshold between who's corporate and not is really a good policy direction, from the sounds of it. I'm still challenged with what to do with the situation we're in, where many people by the ACS surveys and by public comment from city council meetings, not just in Larkspur, but across the county, and from petition signatures across the county, are expressing high levels of housing insecurity. So I still wonder if we haven't defined the problem, or whether we've defined the problem, even in this group. And I just wanted to lead to one other point is I think this group probably, there's a consensus that 1482 is fair. And so if we were to say this is a negotiating table, what would we feel if we took the 10% and dropped it to 8%? Would that be, and since you're up, Dennis, I'm wondering, would that be something that would be unfair? And I know you and I've talked offline, and the question is, administrative burden to the city. So you may want to just speak to that. But, since we, are in our last 30 minutes here, I thought we could use, your position to just, kind of, speak to a couple of those issues. One is, if we did tighten the threshold, the cap, and even put a sunset on that, would that, possibly, like the eviction moratorium, get us through the next year or two?
Okay. First off, before the state legislated the rent controls, I could safely say there were a lot of us longtime property owners and landlords who were very content with raising rents once a year, once every year and a half, and usually in the inflation range. If I go back, I don't think I raised rents more than 3% in the last 10 years at any one point in time. As soon as the state legislation came in and you set this new threshold, CPI or 5%, it was writing on the wall and an awareness that I think happened throughout the landlord community. Hey, 5%, that's our new number. I think the legislation created a problem there. But I could live 8%, if it's a cap at 8, that's fine. Because I've been frugal in purchasing properties and managing them, and reduce my debt or eliminate it completely. Understand, you go in and buy something new and you got a high level of debt, that's an issue. However, if I couldn't afford it, I didn't buy it. If I couldn't see the end of the tunnel. Now, if you go to trying to manage this situation and to control it and have some kind of oversight, it's beyond my imagination of how that could be handled and the cost. Larkspur has mandated below market rent for some housing projects. I have 2 units that are downtown Larkspur that are deed restricted, BMR, been that way for 15, 17 years. A number of years ago, I asked the city of Larkspur planning department to certify that I'm in compliance with the deed restriction and BMR. The answer was, we don't have the ability to review that or to track it, which kind of goes back to your problem of trying to understand who owns what in Larkspur and who owns the real estate. The database is not there. You probably can create it if you want to mine it. But if you do put in a rent control and you have to put in an administration, what it will be the cost of maintaining that type of data, creating the database, maintaining it, dealing with all of the administrative issues of trying to monitor it. It's hard enough in the past years just to get through the process of getting permits. The city has been very frugal in its staffing and trying different programs where they get out third parties to do reviews and stuff, but it still is so burdensome and so time consuming that it makes it very difficult and costly. And here, if we put in a new management system, I can envision, how many people that would take, let alone the computer power. The startup costs alone to get the database and to get people registered will take at least a year or longer. And if you figure out, it doesn't take much to figure out what the cost is per person to try to maintain and manage a business like that. The city government has been run lean and mean for many years. So I would caution about the cost of trying to manage something that doesn't manage and develop a system that doesn't exist. And the county, has its housing authority, which has been woefully inadequate in its ability to manage real estate in the county. All you have to do is read the IJ. And that bureaucracy has been around for many years. I could easily see hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on an annual basis to develop a system and manage it, which would be, I think, wasted money. If we go back to one of the original speakers talking about helping the individuals, I think time would be better spent understanding the members of our community, opening a vehicle for individuals who can get assistance. Yes, there are county levels, there's federal levels, and we have some very good local organizations that have been offering rental assistance to individuals. But I don't think we need to create a whole new elephant, or it's a camel.
Either. Great. Thanks, Dennis. And I just wanted to say, to make my thinking transparent, I've been talking about fairness, and I think there's fairness to this group. What's a fair return? And, that's also constitutionally mandated. And any rent control has to immediately, allow for those appeals. And then there's, what spawned a lot of this, which is fairness to people who are housing insecure. And I think the number is quite high. I mean, if I were to put in a guess, I'd say somewhere between 10 and 30%, but that's my guess. It's not validated. But then there's another element of fairness, which is, fairness to people who want to move into the area. So if we're fair to the incumbents, and don't want to displace them, we may lower the vacancy rates, and then, people of color or our kids or whoever can't move in because, the units are locked or they've been pulled off the market. And then the fourth element of fairness, I think, is fairness to our taxpayers. And, that's where I think you brought up a couple points. I don't know, and I'll ask our city manager at some point, to speak to this, but, in some of our offline conversations, when we say how much will this cost, I mean, I'm seeing two things. One is an administrative cost, and the other is possible changes in tax assessments. But on the administrative side, I think the city manager is saying, well, we don't even have a policy. We can't talk about the costs until we talk about what we're trying to do. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 here, when it comes to looking at that. And we have a lot that we want to do for the city, including the infrastructure and the storm drains and public safety and so forth. So anyway, I just wanted to reflect back.
I hear you on that, but for the fairness, it's a false flag to talk about negative impact on real estate taxes. That's not an issue in Marin County. The last time we had a major recession in Marin County, if you go back to, 1708-09, real estate prices in Marin County stopped. They didn't go down except for a couple of pockets in San Rafael. Go back before that to the 70s, same thing. Real estate prices didn't go down. They just were in a dull, slow moment. So any negative impact on real estate taxes flowing down to the level of Larkspur would not be material. Fairness to the taxpayers of the city of Larkspur that has a relatively modest budget to run the administrative side, which is only a few $1 million a year. The burden is going to be significant. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Thanks so much, Dennis. And I don't know if you have anything, Kevin, but it's definitely appreciate a lot of your candor. I mean, saying that we're not going to lose property taxes. Interesting to hear in this forum.
So if I could just take 2 seconds, Dennis, sure. I know you're still chomping at the bit, but first of all, I want to thank you, Dennis, for participating tonight. Your perspectives are invaluable. And I have to just reflect on the time not too long ago when you invited me to go and take a look at some of the properties, the apartments that you've built out in downtown Larkspur, and they're lovely. And the tenants are happy as clams, as far as I could tell from the conversations that I had with them. So I want to thank you for that. When you started out your remarks, you kind of suggested that I might have formed a conclusion about distinctions that need to be made among the landlord community. I haven't. The purpose of the conversation tonight is to educate us about that and many other issues that are of importance to you and to other landlords in this community. That's really important to me. And any decision that we take, if we take any decision, and I don't know what we're going to do, will reflect that input. So please be assured of that. And that's all I really wanted to say. I just appreciated your showing up, and appreciate your contribution to our community and to housing in this community, because you've done a good job.
Thank you.
That's it.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, Allison, it looks like we have a couple more. Michael Burke, I think. Yes,
we did receive a speaker card from Judy Dixon first. So I'll invite her over. And then I do see that an additional raised hand has come up as well. So we have currently 2 more speakers in the queue.
Great. Thank you, Allison.
Hi. So I'm Gigi Dixon, and thank you for having this meeting this evening, and to everybody who's already spoken. I joined late. I happened to be traveling, came home, and at about 6:30 saw this notice and jumped on. So I didn't get to hear everything, and I regret that. And I'm hoping that there will be another opportunity to contribute, be it by letter or another meeting like this one, because several things, have come to mind while I've been listening to you. And just to give you some background on who I am, as far as Larkspur is concerned, I own 633 Magnolia. You may know it because it is under construction right now and has been an eyesore in the town for probably 10 years. It's a 3-unit building. And then I have a condo across the street in Larkspur Isle. My husband and I do. But we are a mom and pop operation with, single units, duplexes, the triplex on Magnolia, and then throughout Marin. And then we have a 9-unit building in San Francisco. And I grew up as a 4- and 5-year-old answering the phone for my parents with property management calls, dealing with floods as a little kid. I've been a property manager in one way or another for over 50 years. And my tenants too, if you talk to any of them, it's rare that I charge market rent. We got hurt by when AB 1482 came out because our rents were too low and we won't be able to catch up. We just won't. And so there are those of us out there, who really do care, as I've heard other people speak tonight too, about the tenants. And my tenants would tell you, I've worked with, each and every one of them in the 30 years that I've professionally been property manager. I've never had a tenant leave because of the rent, never. And it scares me, especially because we are investing quite a bit at 633 Magnolia right now. And our costs have gone up probably 40% since we started this project. We still don't have our final permit on one aspect of the building. We have a permit for the 2 units in the front, and we're waiting for the permit for the back unit. And, the costs since 2018 have skyrocketed, and there's no way the rents are going to help compensate for that. That's not why we're doing it. That's not why we're investing in that property. We want it to be something that Larkspur's proud of, and we want to provide housing, but it's not something that's going to make us money. So it scares me to have limitations put on it. And I do feel comfortable with AB 1482. I feel that it's fair. I'm also, I don't know if anybody else brought up in San Francisco, which is, a market I know you're going to look at how rent control works there, but it's tipped so far the other way, where I have tenants who, both of the husband and wife both make good money. They have professional, high income jobs, and they're asking me to pay them $50,000 to $100,000 to leave. And their rent is half what market is. Are you following me? In terms of buyouts, it's crazy in San Francisco. And that's not...
I didn't catch. So you have property in San Francisco as well. This is where this is happening. Okay,
yeah,
I missed that point.
So we have a 9-unit building where it's been in my family for a really long time. And that's the one where I started out going with my dad when I was 4 and 5 years old to manage that building. And we have one tenant who pays less than $300. These are 1 bedrooms. One pays $380. And most of the others are at about 50% of what market is in that building. And when a tenant goes to leave, because they've heard and seen that other tenants in San Francisco get paid to leave, they'll come to me and say, I'll leave if you pay me $50,000. And I'm thinking, I've been getting half of market rent and you've been living there for 15 years and now you want an extra $50,000? I want to be in your position. I'll switch positions with you. I mean, it's crazy.
Gigi, I had a quick clarification I wanted to make. So you were saying you were hurt by 1482, the rents are low and won't catch up. How does vacancy decontrol factor into that?
Oh, you mean that being that when they move out, I can raise the rent?
And the average tenancy is I know it's rather high in Larkspur, but nonetheless it's it's still finite, on the
the problem is my tenants won't move out.
Okay.
I don't have to, my tenants don't leave because if you ask them, we take excellent care. We treat our tenants like they're part of our family. We have our tenants, they're like part of a community. So they help each other out. It's the context that we hold, and no one leaves. Or if they do, they'll say, I want to move from here to, I want to move from San Rafael to Sausalito. Do you have an apartment that's vacant in Sausalito? They don't want to, they don't want to leave. And so we did get hurt on a couple of units and they were duplexes where they're subject to AB 1482, but they were, so far below market to begin with that there's no way to catch up.
I see. And I think you bring up a good point. The tenure is often a good thing for landlords because it's people they're not going to smash up the unit. It's there's a cost of turnover and finding people and all the risks associated. However, I think the social contract kind of breaks down, for affordability and displacement. When things spike like they have in the last 12 to 24 months with COVID and inflation, all that. So it's almost like we're facing two sides of one coin. It's like it's great when people stay, but it's not so great when people stay under a regulatory environment, like in your case, AB 1482. So I appreciate that point. And I also wanted to thank you for jumping on this call. And I want to say, we have 17 attendees, and I definitely am learning a lot. And I feel like maybe our city manager can tell us, but the number of small owners like you is really quite large. And I feel that's one of the data gaps. Like, on the tenant side, I really don't know how many people are self-evicting or really rent burdened or housing insecure. I read like everybody does. I'm doing all my homework, but I still can't say with certainty. And then on the ownership side, like yourself, I don't really know those stories. I think we've had, we have Prime, Bon Air, a few others, but like you, Gigi, and some of the others who have spoken, there may be, dozens, if not 100. I think, that number's high, and I don't know what to do about that ecosystem. I think it's a more of a relational type thing. I think the distinction between corporate and that, I don't want to wade into that, but clearly, this is working, as Mr. Gillardi pointed out. This is working for some people, and it seems to be working, for your units. But I do have to say, I've registered a lot of public comment, and I'm getting a lot of input where it's just not working for people, and I'm struggling to find something where there's a solution there and where we can build a consensus. So again, I just wanted to share my feedback, but more than anything, I'm glad you jumped on the call, and I look forward to hearing from more people who have smaller number of units.
And can I just ask one question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you finding that the public comment that you're getting from, I'm assuming this is from tenants who are, struggling or worried about rents going up, are those generally in the larger complexes?
Well, a lot of this did start with Skylark, so that's where there's a tenant group and that, and it's gone to other units. But I think I've learned, in sort of, this position, this volunteer position I'm in right here, is to really try to filter out some of the vocal minority and look at the data. And, I've also asked in other cities, I've worked with the county of Marin, I look at the programs they're doing, and, we know that displacement and rent burdening it's everywhere. It's in the New York Times. And I've gone as far as, really looking at the research in New Jersey. They've studied all the unintended consequences of moderate rent control, and there's just an awful lot of data out there. But a short answer to your question is I think it's come vocally from the larger complexes. Maybe that's because that's it's easier for people to organize and create a voice. But that's why I value your comment, because I have no idea about maybe, you know, half of the rental stock, what's really going on. You know, I don't think I know. And it's hard for us to, you know, as representatives to really come up with policy with these large data gaps. I mean, I feel like I'm getting a better picture, but, you know, with every comment here, it is raising more questions and places for me to look and research. But I definitely appreciate your input. And then, you know, one other thing is I've been both a renter and I've managed property, you know, in no other place than Berkeley. I've managed, you know, 51 units in Berkeley. So I understand many of the people in this room. You know, I was on both sides as a graduate student in Berkeley and as a property manager there. And I know how the system is abused. I also see how it benefits people. And I'm really wondering in 2022, Larkspur, you know, how that would apply here, you know, if at all.
So Gabe, this is Kevin. Can you hear me? Because yep. I'm having some technical difficulties. Just to answer Gigi's question real quick, the answer is yes.
And one other thing, I don't know if anybody brought up about this, it came up for me. Since we largely have, you know, 1 to 4 unit properties, it is much more challenging to get a loan on those properties than it is on a multifamily, which is considered, you know, 5 units or more. And that seems like what's the word I'm looking for? That might be a good dividing point. You know, if you are going to put something in place, is to say this affects units that are 5 and more. That's just my thought.
That's helpful. That actually answers a question that I asked earlier in the conversation. You may not have been on the call at that point, but that's really kind of what I'm looking for. So that's very helpful response. But again, to the question that you asked at the outset, the answer is yes.
Larger, yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much, Gigi.
Sure.
And our final commenter raising his hand is Michael Burke.
Welcome, Michael.
And I'll see if he just prefers to unmute from the
No, he's, yeah, there he goes.
Or he may be joining as a, there we go.
No, he's muted again.
Let's go try. Okay, let's try that. Am I in there now?
Yes.
Yep, we hear you now.
Sorry, thank you. The format for the Zoom meeting is a little different than I'm used to, and with one coming in at a time at the end. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Vice Mayor Paulson, thank you for inviting me to tonight's meeting. I'm not a property owner. I'm not an apartment building owner in Larkspur. Who I am, I'm a real estate agent that specializes in the sale of apartment buildings. I've been doing so for 50 years. I've sold many Larkspur buildings, many buildings throughout Marin. I only sell Marin County. As such, I have a feel for some of the Marin County owners and maybe the market in general and how these things are going to affect them. There's so many areas I'd like to address on what you're talking about. I'll kind of pick them off one at a time as they seem appropriate, and happy to digress on any one of them, jump around. First off, please understand that the majority of Marin County and Larkspur, certainly, the people that own apartment buildings are what I call mom and pop owners. And I'm sorry, Skylark falls in that category, the previous owners. These are mom and pop owners. They do not increase rents at the level that the newspapers and the media and everyone would suggest maybe happens. As Dennis Gillardi suggested, he raises his rents 2 to 3% maybe. Okay, far below what rents are going up. Okay, so what happens? 10 or 20 years, your rents are so far behind market. Now it comes time you want to sell your building. In the old days, I mean, more than 2 years ago, you could sell your building based on what the market rents are, because a new owner could, in theory, raise the rents up to market. You'd make the front page of the IJ, but yes, you could do it. Well, now with 1482, you can't do that. And if Larkspur does something even further, what you're doing is damaging these poor mom and pop owners that have been so nice through the years, keeping their tenants at low rents, being nice to them. All of a sudden, you've just killed them on the value of their building. They cannot sell their building anywhere near what it's worth. I mean, I sell buildings, I have to discount buildings coming up for sale because these are the sellers I have now that have been nice and their rents are so low. I have to discount the value of their building because it cannot be brought up to market rents. This is what rent control does. And I don't think people take into account what it does to the, what I call again, the mom and pop owners, the people that are trying to be nice out there. And that's a great majority of owners. Separate, and Vice Mayor Paulson, when we first talked, the main issue I had was rent control needs to be a statewide issue. It cannot be a local issue. If it could be a county issue, fine, I'd be okay, even okay with that, but I don't think Marin County is set up to be able to deal with that at a county level. It has to be, therefore, at a statewide level. If a municipality, one municipality enacts a rent control that no one else has, I'm sorry, no one is going to invest in that community. No one is going to buy an apartment building in that community. It is off. A lender's not going to lend on it. The lending ratio on that community is going to go way down. The restrictions are too severe for anybody to want to rent there. And the only example that I would have would be Katati, because other areas, it encompasses too large of an area. But say in Sonoma County, only Katati had rent control. I'm sorry, no one would invest in Katati. We didn't even keep it on our books as a property for sale. It was Katati. That's how bad it is. On a third area, maybe just as a general area, rent control in general, rents rise with rent control. I know that it doesn't seem to make sense at first glance, but you got to take it back to basic economics. You've got a full market that has free flow of rents. Okay, fine. It's supply and demand. It's going to settle where rents are supposed to be. Now you enact rent control at any level, a certain percentage of those apartments, I'm sorry, it's going to be a very big percentage of the market, goes out of the marketplace. They're no longer on the market for rent. What's left for the marketplace is a significantly reduced supply, and therefore the rents on those are increased dramatically. Rents rise with rent control. It doesn't make sense, but that's what happens. I've read about it time and time again. My only encouragement here would be, please keep this at a statewide level or a large level if you can. 1482 had enough damage to owners, but it's livable. People accept it. It's workable. To further restrict 1482, I don't think is fair and would isolate Larkspur as an economic community from an investment standpoint. I hope that makes some sense.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. And I remember you did share some of the statistics that are on your website, and I've looked against those in Gillardi matrix. I think one of the challenges is looking at rents and how quickly they're rising. Gillardi matrix has up to 20% rise year to year. Is it's not really accounting for the number of units. So your initial comments were saying small landowners or owners are typically not raising them so quickly, and it's unfair to them. And a lot of the data isn't out for them. So there's a big gap there. But I definitely appreciate your perspective, and having been sort of on the other side of this, when a transfer of property occurs. I mean, that's, I think, what's on a lot of people's minds. It's not so much the the rent itself. It's the actual value of the unit when you decide to sell it, or what the asset is worth. So yeah, thank you for that perspective.
Oh, you're welcome. In my letter to the council, I even cited a practical example, real world current, on a building we just sold. The owner had not increased rents either because of his ill health or because of COVID for a period of about 5 years. Well, I had to market the property. Well, the new owner coming in and the lender is fully expecting to be able to raise the rents as allowed under 1482 at a minimum. These tenants are still going to enjoy rents far below market. But should you further restrict that owner cannot raise at that level, you're really significantly impacting some people that don't need to be impacted by this. It's just not fair.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. And I noticed we're about 1 minute.
Thank you for your time. I know we're at the end of your meeting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
So Allison, I don't know if we have anybody else in the queue, but it's been 2 hours, and I'm wondering if the city manager wants to, say anything, or Kevin. For me, I'll just say quickly, I really want to thank everybody. I've been trying to, make comments to just make transparent, where at least one council member is, and hoping to, get the others to, join us on, trying to look at some of these trade-offs and, what's in front of us. So again, thanks to everybody.
I'll just chime in. This is Kevin, and thank everyone for participating in tonight's session. It's really, really important for us to hear the wide range of voices on this issue, and this has been part of that, and I'm grateful for the input. Thank you.
Okay. Dan, I don't know if you wanted to say anything, maybe next steps.
Sorry, Mr. Vice Mayor, my camera's been giving me a problem. Yes, so the council has this matter on its agenda on Wednesday. And so that'll be during the regular business meeting of the council. So we encourage folks to attend and listen to the discussion among all 5 council members.
Great, thank you. And just one more thing, as Gigi Dixon found out kind of late, I really encourage any of the 17 of you here to reach out to the community. And we've heard quite a lot from the Skylark tenants, and I really I think we all benefit the most when there's a balanced exchange, and we can look at it from all sides. So please stay engaged. Please reach out to others. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I usually respond same day if you email me, and I'm definitely learning a lot, and have some more steps. We'd like to have the tenants and the the owners at Skylark meet. I'm really pushing for that. That has not been dropped, and as the city manager said, it's agendized for the meeting day after tomorrow. So again, thanks so much for your time, everybody, tonight, and we will we'll keep on this issue. Okay, and with that, I think we're adjourned.